This 4-year-old beggar girl went up to a millionaire and said, "Follow me home." But when he got to her house, he saw something that immediately made him cry. If you are also a child advocate, comment love. Richard Sterling's office reflected his meticulous personality. Every document had its exact place, the solid wood furniture maintained a perfect alignment, and even the pens on the desk were arranged in ascending order of size. At 52, the businessman had built an empire in the coal industry through obsessive planning and absolute control over every detail of his life. That March afternoon, as the setting sun painted the Appalachian Mountains golden, he was putting the last contracts in his leather briefcase when he heard small, hesitant footsteps in the hallway. The office door was ajar when a tiny figure appeared in the entrance. It was a girl of approximately 4 years old, with disheveled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. Her bare feet left small marks of dirt on the polished floor. But it was her gaze that stopped Richard, 2 dark eyes, shining with suppressed tears, carrying a despair that shouldn't exist in such a small child. "Follow me home, please," she whispered, her trembling voice echoing in the silence of the office. Richard felt something constrict in his chest. Those simple words awakened memories he had buried decades ago. Himself, at 7, begging strangers for help when his father disappeared for days on drinking binges, leaving him alone with his sick mother. The raw need in the girl's plea cut through his carefully constructed defenses. "How did you get in here, honey?" he asked, crouching down to be at the child's height. "The security guard was sleeping," she replied, wiping her nose with the back of her dirty hand. "I need someone to help me. It's really important." Richard's rationality screamed at him to call security, to follow protocol. Lost children were not his responsibility. His life functioned through clear rules, defined schedules, delimited responsibilities. But when she extended her dirty little hand towards him, something in his heart, hardened 5 years ago, began to stir. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised to hear kindness in his own voice. "Iris. And you're the man from the big building who always wears a blue tie on Tuesdays." The precision of the observation surprised him. She knew him. She had observed his habits. This was not a casual encounter. "How long have you been watching me, Iris?" "Lots of weeks. My sister said that when you really need something, you have to pay attention to people until you find the right one." She held his hand tighter. "You're the right person." "I know it." Richard looked at that determined child and felt his certainties waver. Throughout his adult life, he had avoided unpredictable situations. After losing Carol 5 years ago, he had built a rigid routine that protected him from painful surprises, but something in Iris's silent urgency disarmed his defenses. "Where do you live?" he asked, already knowing that his carefully planned afternoon had come to an end. "Far from here. In the little house behind the church on Maple Street. My sister's waiting, but she can't come get help alone." The church on Maple Street was on the outskirts of town, in an area that Richard only knew from a passing glance when driving by. Simple houses, dirt roads, a reality far removed from his controlled world. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll take you home." The smile that lit up Iris's face was like a ray of sunshine breaking through heavy clouds. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength for such a small child. During the car ride through the narrow streets leading to the outskirts, Iris remained silent, watching everything through the window with intense attention. Richard tried to ask a few questions, but she only responded with gestures or monosyllables, as if all her energy was focused on getting home. The house, when they finally arrived, was even more precarious than he had imagined. Built of wood and some parts of brick, it had an irregular roof and walls that had clearly been patched several times. A small garden in the front showed courageous attempts to grow flowers in repurposed cans. "Here it is," Iris said, jumping out of the car before he even turned off the engine. Richard followed her through the small wooden gate, his dress shoes stepping onto the dirt floor. The front door opened before they even reached it, and a woman appeared in the doorway. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with long hair tied in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded but clean floral dress, and her eyes... Richard stopped abruptly when he realized that she wasn't looking directly at him. Her clear eyes had the characteristic opacity of someone who can't see, and she kept one hand resting on the doorframe, using it as a reference. "Iris, is that you? And did you bring someone?" Her voice carried relief and anxiety at the same time. "Yes, I did, Darlene. I brought the man with the blue tie, just like I said." Darlene. Richard registered the name as he watched the interaction between the two. Even though she was blind, she followed the sound of Iris's voice and knelt on the floor, opening her arms to receive the girl in a tight hug. "You scared me, girl. You said you were just going to the park." "But I did it, sister. I got help." It was then that Darlene turned towards Richard, and he could see the naked vulnerability in her face. She was clearly embarrassed to need help, but also desperate enough not to refuse it. "I'm sorry for the trouble, sir. Iris sometimes... she has a mind of her own." "It was no trouble," Richard lied, still processing the situation. "She said you needed help." Darlene hesitated, clearly waging an internal battle between pride and need. Finally, she sighed. "Something happened today. The stove broke, and without it I can't work. It's how I..." She stopped, biting her lip. "How you what?" "How I earn our living," she finished, the words coming out like a painful confession. Richard looked around the small house, noticing the details that told a story of daily struggle: old but well-cared-for furniture, clean walls despite the peeling paint, and on a table in the corner, dozens of small objects made of woven straw, tiny baskets, flowers, delicate animals. His heart stopped for a moment. He knew that work. Carol made identical crafts. Richard's hands trembled imperceptibly as he approached the table where the crafts were. Each piece was a perfect replica of Carol's creations. The same weaving pattern, the same delicacy in the details, even the way the ends of the straw were folded, followed the exact technique that his wife had mastered for years. "Did you make all this?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarser than he intended. Darlene nodded, a flash of pride crossing her worried expression. "It's what I know how to do. My mum taught me before she passed away. I sell these pieces at the flea market on Saturdays, and we can buy food for the week." Iris tugged insistently on Richard's pants leg. "Uncle, Darlene makes the prettiest little birds. Do you want to see?" Before he could answer, the girl ran to a corner of the house and returned with a small robin made of straw, so perfect that it seemed ready to fly. Richard took it carefully, feeling a lump in his throat. Carol had made an identical one for him on their wedding anniversary, 3 years before she died. "It's beautiful," he managed to say. "Did you learn all this from your mother?" "Mom wasn't our real mom," Iris corrected with the brutal honesty of children. "She and Daddy took care of us until they went to heaven. Now it's just me and Darlene." Darlene blushed deeply. "Iris, you don't need to tell the gentleman that." "But it's true." "And you said the truth is never a bad thing." Richard observed the interaction between the two, noticing the delicate dynamic they had built. Darlene, even though she was only a few years older than a teenager, carried the weight of caring for a child alone. Even with being visually impaired, the responsibility was overwhelming. "How long have you been alone?" he asked gently. 2.5 years, Darlene replied, her hands automatically finding Iris's hair in a protective gesture. "Iris was 1.5 years when they passed. I was 31. The silence that followed was filled only by the distant sound of children playing in the street and the melancholy song of a mockingbird in the yard. Richard felt completely out of his element. His life was made of numbers, contracts, rational decisions, but there, faced with that situation, his usual tools were useless. "The stove," he said finally. "What's the exact problem?" Darlene's eyes filled with tears that she struggled to contain. "The main burner won't light anymore. Without it, I can't melt the paraffin to waterproof the pieces. And without waterproofing, they don't last even a week in the rain. How much would it cost to fix? The technician said it needs a new part, $120. The amount came out like a defeated whisper. It's almost all the money I've managed to save this month. For Richard, $120 was what he spent on a single meal in expensive restaurants. But seeing the desperation on Darlene's face, he understood that for her, it represented the difference between eating and going hungry. "What if I paid for the repair?" he offered, trying to sound casual. Darlene's reaction was immediate and fierce. "No, I don't accept handouts. I never have, and I won't start now." The vehemence of the refusal surprised him. Iris ran to her sister, hugging her leg as if she could protect her from some invisible threat. "It's not a handout," Richard tried. "It's an investment. You have real talent for this. Your pieces are extraordinary." "You don't even know my work that well," she replied, her voice still hard with wounded pride. It was then that Richard made a decision that would change the course of all his carefully structured plans. "Then show me. I want to buy some pieces for my company." Darlene frowned, suspicious. "What kind of company?" "Coal mining. We have a main office and 3 smaller units. We always need corporate gifts, decorations for receptions." He was improvising, but the words came out with increasing conviction. Local crafts would be perfect. The girl next to Darlene started jumping for joy. "Sister, he's going to buy your little birds." But Darlene remained skeptical. Years of hardship had taught her to distrust overly generous offers. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." The question hit Richard hard. Why was he doing that? He didn't know those people. His life was working perfectly well without sentimental complications. But when he looked at Iris, he saw something that completely disarmed him, pure hope, without disguises or calculations. "Because your sister asked me for help," he said simply, "and because it's been a long time since I've seen such perfect craftsmanship." Darlene remained silent for a long moment, her nervous fingers playing with the hem of her dress. Finally she sighed. "If you really want to buy some pieces, I can set aside what I have ready. But I'll pay for the stove repair with my own money after I sell them." It was a proud compromise, and Richard respected that. "Agreed. But I want to see everything you have." What followed was a revelation. Darlene guided him through the small house, her hands knowing every inch of the space. In a back room that served as a workshop, there were hundreds of pieces organized in boxes, from small animals to complex baskets that must have taken days to complete. "My God," Richard murmured, picking up a perfect miniature of a colonial church. "Is this the church on Maple Street?" "It is," confirmed Darlene, a shy smile appearing on her face. "I make them from memory. I knew every detail before the accident." "What accident?" The smile disappeared instantly. Darlene turned to the wall, her shoulders tense. "It happened 6 years ago. I worked for a construction company. There was a problem with chemicals." Her voice became almost inaudible. "I lost my sight in 3 days." "And the company? Did they give you assistance?" A bitter laugh escaped Darlene's lips. "The owner said it was my carelessness, that I didn't use the protective equipment properly. He fired me while I was still in the hospital." Richard felt a cold rage settling in his chest. He knew businessmen like that. Men who put profit above human lives, who hid behind lawyers when their negligence caused tragedies. What was the name of the company? Hartman Construction. Why? The name hit Richard like a punch. Edward Hartman was his biggest competitor in the region, a man he had despised for years for his questionable practices. Knowing that Hartman had destroyed Darlene's life made something violent awaken inside him. "Do you know the owner?" asked Darlene, noticing the change in his voice. "I know him," he replied, trying to maintain control, "and he will pay for it." Iris, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, suddenly shouted from the yard, "Darlene, there's a strange man looking at our house." Everyone turned towards the window, and Richard saw a male figure standing across the street, watching them with suspicious attention. When he realized he had been noticed, the man quickly walked away. "Who was it?" asked Darlene, the concern showing in her voice. "I don't know." Richard lied, but a chill ran down his spine. He was sure he had recognized the man. He was one of Edward Hartman's employees. During the next 2 weeks, Richard found himself breaking all his meticulously established routines. Instead of going straight home after work, he diverted his route to pass by Darlene and Iris's house. He always brought some excuse. He needed to check the quality of the ordered pieces. He wanted to discuss new models, or he was simply coming to pick up items he had forgotten on the previous visit. The truth was, he couldn't stay away. There was something about that simple house that filled a void in his chest that he didn't even know existed. Maybe it was the way Iris ran to greet him whenever he arrived, shouting "Uncle Richard" with a genuine joy that no one had shown when seeing him in years. Or maybe it was Darlene's silent determination, who worked tirelessly on her pieces even without being able to see the final result. The stove had been fixed on the 3rd day, but Darlene had insisted on paying with the money from the sale of the pieces he had bought. There were only 15 items, but he had paid a price well above the market value, claiming they were special corporate gifts. She had suspected the generosity, but needed the money too much to refuse. One Thursday afternoon, Richard arrived to find the house unusually silent. Normally, Iris would be playing in the yard or helping Darlene with small tasks. But this time, he only heard the low sound of a conversation coming from inside. "Darlene," he called, knocking lightly on the door. "Come in, please," came the answer, but there was something different in her voice. He found the two sitting at the kitchen table. Iris was unusually quiet, playing with a piece of straw, while Darlene kept her hands crossed on the table, a tense expression on her face. "Has something happened?" asked Richard, pulling up a chair. Darlene hesitated, clearly debating internally whether she should tell him or not. Finally, she sighed. "They came here today, 2 men. They said they represented the city council." "And what did they want?" "They talked about irregularities in the house, that it doesn't have a proper building permit, that I'm selling products without a business license." Her voice became weaker and weaker. "They gave me 30 days to regularize everything." Richard felt the familiar cold rage settling in. "What did these men look like? I didn't see them, right?" "But Iris was with me." The girl looked up from her toy. One was fat and had a deep voice. The other was skinny and had a scar on his hand. The description matched perfectly with 2 employees that Richard knew by sight, men who worked for Edward Hartman in special services. Apparently, his visit hadn't gone unnoticed. "Darlene, do you have any documents for the house?" "I have what my parents left me, but I don't understand any of it." She got up and went to a small chest in the corner of the room, returning with a yellowed folder. "It's all here." Richard examined the papers. The property was correctly registered, but there were some technical issues about expansions made over the years. Nothing that couldn't be resolved with a good lawyer and some money. "I'm going to help you fix this," he said. "No!" Darlene's response was immediate and firm. "You've already done too much. I can't accept any more favors. It's not a favor, it's justice. It's disguised charity," she retorted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "You show up here with your expensive clothes, your new car, and you want to solve all our problems with money. Do you think we're charity cases?" The accusation hit Richard like a slap. Was that what he was doing? Trying to buy a clean conscience? "That's not it," he said, but his voice sounded less convincing than he intended. "Then what is it?" Darlene got up, walking to the window with the confident steps of someone who knew every obstacle in the house. Why would a rich man care about 2 poor souls like us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Iris watched the discussion with wide eyes, clearly not understanding why the adults were angry at each other. Richard struggled to find the right words. How to explain that seeing them had awakened something in him that he thought was gone forever? How to say that Darlene's determination reminded him of his own struggle to escape poverty, or that Iris's smile was the first thing that had made him genuinely happy since Carol's passing? "Because you remind me of who I was before I became who I am," he said finally. Darlene turned around, her expression softening slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means that I was poor too. I've gone hungry. I've been afraid of not being able to pay the rent." He looked at his own hands, calloused by years of hard work before success. "The difference is that I got lucky, and maybe had some opportunities that you didn't. And now you want to feel better by helping the poor little things?" The irony in Darlene's voice made him sigh. "No. Now I want to stop people like Edward Hartman from destroying more lives." The name hit Darlene like a physical blow. She leaned on the windowsill, her face paling. You know him?" "I know him. And I know that the men who came here today work for him. But why? Why would he care about us?" Richard hesitated. Telling the truth would mean admitting that Hartman had probably found out about his visits and was using Darlene to get to him, but lying would be worse. "Because he saw me here, and we are, let's say, business competitors." Understanding dawned slowly on Darlene's face. "So all this is because of you? The problems, the threats?" "Darlene, get out," she said, her voice trembling with contained anger. "Get out of our house now." "Let me explain. Get out!" Iris started to cry, frightened by her sister's scream. Richard got up slowly, his heart heavy. Darlene was right. His presence had brought problems for them. "I'm going to fix this," he promised, heading to the door. "I don't want you to fix anything. I want you to leave us alone." Richard stopped on the threshold, looking back one last time. Iris had run to Darlene, who was hugging her protectively. The scene reminded him painfully of his own childhood, his mother trying to protect him from a hostile world that seemed determined to knock them down. "Uncle Richard?" Iris's small voice made him stop. "Are you not coming back?" Before he could answer, Darlene silenced her. "He's not coming back, Iris. And it's better that way." Walking to his car, Richard felt a weight on his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. He had tried to do the right thing and had only made things worse. But one thing he knew for sure: no matter what Darlene said, he wouldn't abandon them to their fate. Edward Hartman had made a mistake by involving innocence in his personal war, and Richard would make sure to show him the price of that decision. As he started the car, he saw Iris one last time in the window, waving sadly at him. The vision would haunt him for the next few days, fueling a determination that grew like fire in his bones. The war had officially begun. 3 weeks had passed since Darlene had kicked Richard out of her house, and the businessman found that their absence was like a wound that wouldn't heal. His routines returned to normal. Meetings, contracts, solitary dinners, but something fundamental had changed. The luxurious apartment seemed emptier, the work more mechanical, and even the pleasure he felt in closing big deals had lost its flavor. He had resisted the impulse to go back there, respecting Darlene's request, but he couldn't resist a discreet investigation. He discovered that the bureaucratic problems weren't real. Edward had used contacts at City Hall to create non-existent difficulties. Even worse, there was evidence that men linked to Hartman were frequenting the area, intimidating neighbors to stop buying Darlene's crafts. The strategy was cruel and effective, isolating the two economically until they had no choice but to accept any offer of help that appeared. That Saturday morning, Richard was reviewing contracts when his secretary called, despite it being the weekend. "Mr. Sterling, sorry to bother you, but there's a little girl here at the front desk. She says she needs to talk to you urgently." Richard's heart skipped a beat. "A little girl? What does she look like?" "Small, brown hair, about 4 years old. She's pretty agitated, sir." "Send her up immediately." Richard ran to the elevator, meeting Iris before she even reached his floor. The girl was clearly in a panic. Disheveled hair, dirty clothes, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Richard!" She threw herself into his arms as soon as she saw him. "You need to come with me now. Darlene is very sick." "What happened?" he asked, picking her up. "She started feeling bad last night. She got a fever, saying strange things. She can't even get out of bed." Iris sobbed against his shoulder. "I don't know what to do. I don't have money for the doctor." Richard didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and went down with her to the garage, driving immediately to the outskirts of town. During the ride, Iris said that Darlene had spent the last few days not eating properly, too worried to have an appetite. She had sold only 2 pieces at the flea market last Saturday, and the money barely covered the basics. "She cries when she thinks I'm not watching," said Iris with the sad wisdom of children who grow up too early. "I think she's scared." The house seemed even more fragile under the harsh light of midday. Richard followed Iris to the small room where Darlene was lying, and what he saw alarmed him deeply. She was pale, sweaty, clearly with a high fever. When she heard their voices, she tried to sit up. "Iris? Who's there with you?" "It's Uncle Richard. I brought him to help." "No," Darlene tried to protest, but a wave of dizziness made her fall back on the pillow. "I told you not to." "Darlene, you need a doctor," said Richard, approaching the bed. "Now, I don't have money for a doctor," she murmured, her eyes closed. "I do. I don't want your charity." "Then consider it a loan," he interrupted, already grabbing his cell phone. "You pay me back when you can." Before she could protest again, Richard called Dr. Matthews, his family's private doctor for years. He explained the situation quickly and asked him to come to the house immediately. While they waited, Richard observed the deplorable state of the room. Besides the simple bed, there was only an old dresser and some boxes with half-finished crafts. It was clear that Darlene had continued working even while sick, in a desperate attempt to maintain some income. "Why didn't you come to me before?" he asked softly. "Because you've already done too much," she replied, her voice weak. "And because I didn't want you to see us like this, failures. You haven't failed. You're fighting against an unjust system." Darlene opened her eyes, looking at him with an expression of deep weariness. "Do you really think you can change anything? Against men like Hartman? I know I can. And if you can't? And if he decides to do something worse to us?" The question hit Richard hard. He had thought about his own war against Edward, but he hadn't fully considered the consequences for Darlene and Iris if his revenge failed. Dr. Matthews arrived 40 minutes later, a middle-aged man with grey hair and gentle manners. He examined Darlene carefully, asking questions about her symptoms and medical history. "It's a respiratory infection complicated by malnutrition," he diagnosed, while preparing some medication. "Nothing that can't be treated, but she needs rest, proper nutrition, and these antibiotics." "Malnutrition?" Richard looked at Darlene, horrified. "She was giving her food to me," explained Iris naturally. "She said that children need to eat more than adults." The doctor stepped aside with Richard for a private conversation in the yard. "The situation is more serious than it seems," said Dr. Matthews. "She's clearly under extreme stress. Her body is responding as if it were in a constant state of alert. That, combined with poor nutrition, can she have permanent consequences? If it continues like this, yes. And there's one more thing." The doctor hesitated. "During the examination, I noticed some old scars on her arms, consistent with chemical burns from the work accident. Probably, but the pattern suggests that they were much more extensive than she admits. It must have been extremely traumatic." Richard felt the familiar rage growing in his chest. Edward had not only blinded Darlene, he had mutilated her body and then abandoned her to her fate. When they went back inside, they found Iris trying to give Darlene water, who was coughing violently. "I need to take her to a hospital," said Dr. Matthews, "for intravenous hydration and closer monitoring." "No." Darlene tried to sit up again. "I can't afford a hospital." "It's already taken care of," said Richard firmly. "And before you protest, remember that Iris needs you healthy." The mention of her sister broke down Darlene's defenses. She looked at Iris, who was watching her with obvious fear, and nodded weakly. "Okay, but I want everything documented. Every penny you spend, I'll pay you back." During the ride to the hospital, with Darlene semi-conscious in the back seat and Iris holding her hand, Richard made a decision that would change everything. It wasn't enough to just take care of Darlene's health. He needed to make sure that Edward could never hurt them again. At the hospital, while the doctors took care of Darlene, Iris snuggled up next to Richard in the waiting room. "Uncle Richard, is Darlene going to be okay?" "Yes, honey. She just needs to rest and get stronger." "And then? Is the bad man going to keep trying to hurt us?" Iris's innocent question revealed an understanding of the situation that broke Richard's heart. A 4-year-old shouldn't know about bad men who wanted to hurt her family. "No," he promised, pulling her closer. "No one is going to hurt you. Ever again." "How do you know?" Richard looked through the hospital window at the city below, the lights starting to turn on in the darkening afternoon. "Because sometimes, when bad people do bad things, other people need to be brave enough to stop them. And you're going to be brave. I'm going to be the bravest I've ever been in my life." But even as he made that promise, Richard knew that he was preparing for a battle that could destroy him. Edward Hartman had connections, money, and few scruples. He was a formidable enemy. However, for the first time in 5 years, Richard had something worth fighting for. Darlene spent 3 days in the hospital, and during that time, Iris practically moved into Richard's house. The businessman had insisted that she stay in the apartment since there was no one else to take care of her, and he found that having a 4-year-old completely transformed his structured routine. Iris woke up at 6 in the morning, humming a melody that she said she had learned from Darlene. It was an old folk song about birds that flew freely through the mountains, and something in that childish voice, echoing through the corridors of the apartment, awakened a memory buried in Richard's heart. Carol sang the same song while cooking on Sunday mornings. "Uncle Richard, why did you get sad?" asked Iris one morning, finding him standing in the kitchen with moist eyes. "I'm not sad, honey. I just remembered someone special. The aunt who lived here before." The question surprised him. "How do you know about that?" "There's a picture of her on your desk, and you keep looking at the picture when you think no one's watching." Iris approached, taking his hand with the naturalness of children. She was pretty. She seemed nice too. She was. Very nice. "And she went to heaven like my parents." Richard nodded, unable to speak. "Then she must be taking care of Darlene from up there," said Iris, with absolute conviction. "Good people always help other good people." The simplicity of Iris's faith touched something deep in Richard. For years, he had closed himself off to any kind of hope or spirituality, considering them luxuries that he couldn't afford. But hearing that child express so much confidence in the goodness of the universe made something stir in his hardened chest. On the second day, something happened that changed Richard's perspective on a lot of things. Iris was playing in the living room when she suddenly stopped and ran to the window. "Uncle Richard, come see! It's the man who kept looking at our house." Richard approached the window and saw a car parked across the street. It was the same model that he had seen near Darlene's house. The driver realized he had been noticed and sped away, but not before Richard could clearly see his face. "Iris, are you sure it's the same man?" "Yes, I'm sure. He has a dark spot on his neck. Darlene said that some people are born with it." The girl's observation was too accurate to be a coincidence. Edward wasn't just intimidating Darlene, he was watching him too. This meant that the situation was more serious than he had imagined. That afternoon, when they went to visit Darlene at the hospital, she was visibly better. The color had returned to her face, and she could sit up in bed without dizziness. "How are you feeling?" asked Richard. "Better, much better." She held Iris's hand, who had run to hug her. "The doctor said I can go home tomorrow." "Great, but there's a condition." Darlene frowned. "What condition?" "You can't go home yet. It's not safe." "What do you mean it's not safe?" Richard hesitated, not wanting to scare her, but knowing that he needed to tell the truth. "Edward is having you watched. Iris recognized one of the men near my building." Darlene's face paled. "He knows where you live?" "Apparently, yes." "My God, what have we done?" she murmured, covering her face with her hands. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't sent Iris to look for you..." "It's not your fault. It's his fault for being an unscrupulous man. But now we've put you in danger too." Richard sat on the edge of the bed, watching the despair grow in Darlene's eyes. "Darlene, can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded hesitantly. "Why did you never try to sue the company for the accident?" Darlene's face closed off immediately. "I tried. I went to 3 different lawyers. They all said the same thing, that it would be my word against the company's, that I had no way to prove negligence." "And you accepted that? What else could I do? I was just a worker. He owned a big company. Who was going to believe me? What if I told you that I can prove his negligence?" Darlene raised her head sharply. "How?" "I have contacts in the area, people who can investigate what really happened in that accident." Richard leaned forward. "But I'd need your authorization and your courage." "My courage? To face him publicly? To tell your story without fear?" Darlene was silent for a long time, her fingers nervously playing with the hospital sheet. Iris watched the conversation without fully understanding, but sensing the tension in the air. What if it goes wrong? What if he decides to take revenge? Then we'll face it together. "Why would you do this for me? For us?" The question echoed in the silence of the room. Richard looked at Iris, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes, then at Darlene, who even blind could convey all her vulnerability through her expression. "Because you two reminded me of who I really am," he said finally. "Before I had money, before success, I was just a poor boy who dreamed of being strong enough to protect the people I loved. And you gave me a second chance to be that person." Tears streamed down Darlene's face. "What if we lose? What if he's smarter, more powerful? Then at least we'll have tried. And Iris will grow up knowing that you fought for what was right." The girl, hearing her name, approached the bed. "Darlene, Uncle Richard is good. He took good care of me while you were sick. He even learned how to make that oatmeal you make." Darlene smiled through her tears, reaching out to touch Iris's face. "Did you like staying at Uncle Richard's house?" "I liked it a lot. He has a big bathtub, and he let me put in bubbles, and he has lots of books with pictures." "And was he nice to you?" "He was the nicest in the world. He even read me a story to sleep, just like you do." Darlene turned towards Richard, and for the first time since they met, there was something beyond distrust in her expression. "If I agree to this, to suing Edward, do you promise me something?" "What?" "That you won't give up halfway, that you'll stay on our side until the end, no matter what happens." "I promise. And if we discover things about the accident, things that might be hard to hear, do you promise to tell me the truth, all of it?" Richard hesitated. There was something in Darlene's tone that suggested she suspected more things about her own accident. "All of it," he promised. Darlene took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "Then it's settled. We're going to fight him." That night, after leaving Iris sleeping in the guest room, Richard stayed up late, making calls and organizing his strategy. He had the feeling that he was about to discover things about Darlene's accident that would change everything he thought he knew about Edward Hartman. And he was right. The investigation began the following Monday when Richard hired Jerry Morales, one of the best private investigators in the area. Jerry was a 58-year-old former police officer, retired early after having problems with corrupt superiors. His specialty was unraveling cases involving unscrupulous businessmen. "What exactly do you want to know about the accident?" asked Jerry during the first meeting in his modest office in the city center. "Everything, every detail, every document that was hidden, every witness who was silenced," replied Richard. Edward Hartman destroyed that girl's life, and I'm sure it wasn't simple negligence. Jerry made some notes on a yellowed pad. 6 years is a long time. Documents disappear, people move out of town, memories get confused, but can you try? I can, but it's going to be expensive, and I can't guarantee results. Money is not a problem. And about results, Richard leaned forward. I have the impression that Edward left traces. Men like him always do. While Jerry began his work, Richard faced a different challenge, keeping Darlene and Iris safe. He had rented a small but comfortable house in a middle-class neighborhood, far from both his residence and the outskirts where they lived before. It was a compromise that allowed them to maintain some independence while staying protected. I don't like being hidden, complained Darlene on the third morning in the new house while they were having breakfast. I feel like a fugitive. It's temporary, assured Richard, until we resolve the situation with Edward. And if we don't, are we going to be running from him for the rest of our lives? Iris, who was playing with pieces of bread, raised her head. Why don't we go live on a really high mountain? That way the bad man can't climb up. The innocent suggestion drew a sad smile from Darlene. It's not that simple, my little one. Why not? In the story that Uncle Richard read, the princess went to live in a high tower and was safe, because in real life people can't just run away from problems, explained Darlene. Sometimes we need to face them, like what you're doing with the bad man. Exactly. That afternoon, Jerry called with the first findings, and what he found exceeded even Richard's expectations. I found 3 former employees of Hartman Construction who worked on the site where the accident happened, reported the investigator. 2 moved out of town, but I was able to locate one who still lives here. His name is John Baker. He works as a freelance bricklayer. And is he willing to talk? He is, but he's scared. He said that Edward has eyes and ears all over town. Schedule a meeting in a neutral location. The meeting took place at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from the busy center. John Baker was a man in his early 40s, thin, with hands calloused from hard work. He was visibly nervous, constantly looking around as if he expected to be watched. I shouldn't be saying this, he said, stirring his coffee without drinking. But that girl, what happened to her wasn't fair. Tell me what you saw, asked Richard. Darlene was a good employee. Careful, always followed the safety rules. But that day, John paused, taking a deep breath. Edward was in a hurry to finish the job. He said that if he didn't deliver on time, he'd lose the contract. And then he ordered us to use stronger chemicals to speed up the process, things that needed special protective equipment, proper ventilation. But there was none of that on the site. Richard felt his stomach clench. Did Darlene know the risks? No one knew. Edward didn't say it was different from the normal product. The girl was doing the work she always did, the way she always did it. John shook his head, clearly disturbed by the memory. When she started feeling sick, the boss said it was just female weakness. They only took her to the hospital when she fainted. And the other employees? Weren't anyone else affected? They were. 3 guys had respiratory problems. 1 had skin burns. But men can take more, right? And everyone had a family to support. They accepted a small settlement and signed papers saying they wouldn't sue. And Darlene? With her it was different. The damage was much worse, so the boss decided it was better to put the blame on herself. The revelation hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. Edward had not only caused the accident through negligence, he had consciously used dangerous products without warning the employees and then blamed Darlene to avoid greater responsibility. John, would you sign a formal statement about this? The man turned pale. Mr. Sterling, I have a family, 3 small children. If Edward finds out I talked, he won't find out, and I'll guarantee your protection. How? Richard had no immediate answer to that. How to protect all the people that Edward might want to intimidate. Let me think of a way. But your statement could change everything for Darlene. John was silent for a long moment, clearly waging an internal battle between fear and conscience. Did she lose her sight because of that? He asked finally. She did. And the boss didn't give her anything? Not even a pension? Not even insurance? Nothing. He fired her while she was still in the hospital. John's face twisted with anger. Son of a bitch, sorry for the word, but that's what he is. He slammed his fist on the table, making the cups tremble. Okay, I'll sign the statement, but I want guarantees that my family will be protected. You'll have all the guarantees that I can give. When Richard returned home that night, he found Darlene and Iris in the living room, the girl drawing while Darlene groped for a new piece of craft. How was the meeting? Asked Darlene as soon as she heard him come in. Productive, very productive. Did you discover anything new? Richard looked at Iris, who was absorbed in her drawings. Iris, how about going to play in the room? The adults need to talk. Is it about the bad man? Asked the girl. It's about boring adult stuff, said Darlene. Go play for a bit, then I'll help you draw the new house. After Iris left, Richard sat next to Darlene and told her everything that John had revealed. With each word, he saw her face grow paler. So he knew, she whispered when he finished. He knew that the product was dangerous and didn't warn us. He knew, and then he blamed you for the accident to protect himself. Darlene was silent for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. Darlene, for all these years, I blamed myself, she said, her voice low and laden with emotion. I thought I had done something wrong, that I had been careless. When the doctors said I would lose my sight, the first thing I thought was that it was punishment for being incompetent. It wasn't your fault. I know that now, but you can't imagine what it's like to carry that guilt for 6 years. Tears began to stream down her face. Iris was born shortly after the accident, and every time she asked me why I couldn't see, I died of shame inside. Richard wanted to hug her, but he didn't know if he would be welcome. Instead, he reached out to find her hand. Now we're going to prove the truth, and he's going to pay for everything he did. What if he tries to hurt us before that? It was then that Richard realized he had underestimated the situation. Edward wasn't just an unscrupulous businessman. He was a dangerous man, willing to do anything to protect his secrets. And they had just awakened all his attention. Edward's response came 3 days later, in a way that Richard would never expect. He was in the office reviewing contracts when he received a phone call that made his blood run cold. Mr. Sterling, this is from the Santa Rita Elementary School. The girl Iris hasn't been picked up today. The lady who usually picks her up didn't show up. Richard's heart leaped into his throat. Darlene always picked up Iris punctually at 5 in the afternoon. It was a sacred routine that she never broke. I'm going to pick her up now, he said, already grabbing his car keys. During the ride to the school, 1,000 terrible possibilities passed through his mind. And when he arrived home with Iris and found the door ajar, he knew that his worst fears had materialized. "Darlene!" he shouted, cautiously entering the house. There was no answer. Iris clung to his leg, clearly frightened by the abnormal silence. "Where's Darlene, Uncle Richard?" "I don't know, honey. Let's look." They found signs of a struggle in the living room, a chair knocked over, some pieces of craft scattered on the floor. But it was in the kitchen that Richard saw something that made him tremble with rage. A note left on the table. "Mr. Sterling, your little friend is fine for now. If you want to see her again, stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. Await contact." Iris began to cry when she realized that her sister was nowhere in the house. "They took Darlene away?" she sobbed. "They did, but we're going to bring her back," promised Richard, picking her up while dialing Jerry's number. "I need you to come here now," he said when the investigator answered. "Edward kidnapped Darlene." Jerry arrived in 15 minutes, accompanied by 2 men Richard didn't know. "They're former colleagues of mine from the police," explained Jerry. trustworthy people. While the men examined the house for clues, Jerry spoke with Richard in the yard, away from Iris's ears. "This changes everything," said the investigator. "Edward crossed a line of no return. Where could she be? Hartman has several properties in the area. Some industrial warehouses, a farm on the outskirts." Jerry paused, thoughtful. "But if I were him, I'd choose a place where I could completely control the situation." "What do you mean?" "A secluded place where her screams wouldn't bother anyone." The coldness of the observation made Richard feel nauseous. The image of Darlene alone, scared, possibly injured, was unbearable. "How much time do we have?" "It depends on what he wants. If it's just psychological pressure, maybe he won't hurt her, but if he feels cornered..." Jerry didn't need to finish the sentence. That night was the longest of Richard's life. Iris cried until she fell asleep from exhaustion in his arms, murmuring her sister's name. He put her to bed and stayed awake in the living room, waiting for the phone to ring. The call came at 2 in the morning. "Richard Sterling?" The voice was unrecognizable, clearly disguised. "It's me. Where is Darlene?" "Safe, for now, but that could change quickly if you're not reasonable." "What do you want?" "For you to stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. For you to send your little investigator away from the city. And for you to convince that idiot bricklayer to forget the nonsense he's been saying. And if I do that, you'll release Darlene. Maybe. Or maybe I just won't hurt her. Much." The explicit threat made something primal awaken in Richard's chest. "If you lay a finger on her, you'll what? Call the police? Sue? Tell the newspapers?" The voice on the other end laughed cruelly. "Who do you think is going to believe the word of a rich businessman against mine, especially when they find out you're obsessed with a disabled woman and an orphaned child? Son of a... Watch your words. Remember that I have your little friend here with me, and she has such delicate skin." Richard clenched his fists, fighting the urge to smash the phone. "What do you want exactly?" "Tomorrow, at 10 in the morning, you're going to go to the local newspaper and give an interview. You're going to say that you were wrong about the case of the blind girl, that you discovered that she really was negligent at work. You're going to apologize publicly for the misunderstanding. And then you disappear from their lives. Forever." The line went silent. Richard remained with the phone in his hand for several minutes, processing the situation. Edward not only wanted him to stop the investigation, he wanted to humiliate him publicly and force him to abandon Darlene and Iris. The next morning, Iris woke up asking for her sister. "Did Darlene come back, Uncle Richard?" "Not yet, honey, but she'll be back soon." "Do you promise?" Richard looked at those trusting eyes and felt the weight of responsibility crush his shoulders. "I promise." At 9 in the morning, he was preparing to leave for the newspaper when Jerry appeared with unexpected news. "I found her," said the investigator, out of breath from running. "Where?" "In an old abandoned sawmill, about 20 miles from the city. My contacts in the police confirmed suspicious activity at the site." "Is she okay?" "I don't know, but I know we have a small window of opportunity. Edward is in town today, at a meeting at City Hall. It's our chance." Richard looked at Iris, who was playing in the room, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "What if it's a trap?" "It could be, but it's the only plan we have." During the ride to the sawmill, Richard tried not to think about what they might find there. Edward had proven to be capable of anything to protect his secrets, and Darlene had become the target of all his cruelty. The abandoned sawmill was a sinister place, with rusty machines and piles of rotten wood. Jerry and his men positioned themselves strategically around the main building, while Richard approached the entrance. It was then that he heard, weak but unmistakable, the sound of someone singing. It was the same melody that Iris hummed every morning, the folk song about free birds. Darlene was alive, and she was singing to keep hope alive. Richard had never felt so determined in his entire life. Edward had made a fatal mistake by touching the people he loved. Now it was time to show the corrupt businessman what happened when someone awakened the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The rescue of Darlene was simultaneously easier and more traumatic than Richard expected. They found only two men guarding the sawmill, poorly paid thugs who fled as soon as they saw Jerry and his former police colleagues approaching. Apparently, Edward had underestimated Richard's determination and didn't expect such a quick response. Darlene was tied to an old chair in the middle of the main warehouse. She had a cut on her lip and bruises on her arms, but she was conscious and relatively unharmed. When she heard Richard's voice, she began to cry with relief. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as he untied the ropes. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me." "Never," he promised, helping her to her feet. "I'm never going to abandon you." But what should have been a moment of relief turned into a new source of terror when Darlene recounted what had happened during the kidnapping. "They didn't just bring me here to scare me," she said on the way back home, her voice trembling. "One of them, the one who seemed to be the boss, he said terrible things about what they were going to do to me if you didn't obey." "What kind of things?" Darlene shivered, hugging herself. "He said they had already done this to other people who bothered the boss. He said I was going to disappear, like others who asked too many questions about workplace accidents." The revelation hit Richard like a bolt of lightning. "Other people? What other people?" "I don't know, but from the way they talked, it seemed like it wasn't the first time they'd done it." Jerry, who was driving the car, exchanged a meaningful look with Richard in the rearview mirror. Both thought the same thing. If Edward had done this before, they weren't just dealing with a corrupt businessman, but with someone possibly responsible for disappearances. When they arrived home, Iris ran to hug Darlene with a desperate force, as if she feared that she might disappear again. "Are you hurt?" asked the girl, gently touching her sister's face. "Just a little. But I'm better now." "Did the bad man hurt you?" Darlene hesitated, clearly not wanting to scare Iris more than she already was. "A little, but Uncle Richard saved me, like a hero from the stories." That night, after Iris fell asleep between them in the living room, refusing to leave Darlene's side, the two adults talked about what to do next. "We can't keep going on like this," said Darlene. "He's going to try again. And next time it might be worse. Or it might be with Iris," added Richard, verbalizing the fear that both carried. "Exactly. I can't put her at risk because of my thirst for justice." "So you want to give up?" Darlene was silent for a long time, her fingers stroking Iris's hair, who was sleeping with her head in her lap. "I want him to pay for what he did. Not only to me, but to all the people he hurt. But I can't sacrifice Iris for that. If I have to choose between justice and her safety, I'll choose her. Always." It was then that Richard made a decision that would completely change the course of events. "What if there was a third option?" "What do you mean?" "What if I guaranteed that you two would be completely safe while we destroy Edward once and for all?" Darlene frowned. "How would you do that?" "You're going to leave town for a few weeks. You're going to stay in a place where he could never find you. And I'll stay here and finish the job." "Alone?" "Not alone. With Jerry, with John Baker, with all the people that Edward has hurt over the years." Richard leaned forward, his voice filled with determination. "Darlene, during the investigation, we discovered that you weren't his only victim. There are at least 3 more cases of mysterious accidents on his construction sites in the last 10 years. "Really?" "Really. And if we can gather all those people, we'll have enough strength to take him down for good. And if they're too scared to talk, then we'll show them that it's possible to face him and win." The next morning, Jerry brought news that confirmed their worst fears. During the night, the house where they lived before had been set on fire. Neighbors reported seeing 2 men fleeing the scene shortly before the flames started. "It was a message," said Jerry. "He's showing what he can do when he feels threatened." "Was anyone hurt?" asked Darlene, paling. No, thank God the house was empty. But if you were still living there... Iris, who was playing on the floor with some toys that Richard had bought, raised her head. Did our house catch fire? It did, my little one, replied Darlene sadly. But it was just a house. The important thing is that we're all okay. And my drawings that were on the wall in my room? They're probably gone too. Iris was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Then, to everyone's surprise, she didn't cry. Instead, she got up and went to the window. It doesn't matter, she said with a wisdom surprising for her age. I can make new drawings of even prettier birds. The girl's reaction touched Richard deeply. At 4 years old, Iris had already learned that sometimes it was necessary to start over, that sometimes the important things weren't objects, but people. It was at that moment that he realized that he wasn't just fighting for justice or revenge. He was fighting for the right of people like Iris and Darlene to live without fear, for the right of children to draw birds on the walls without cruel men burning down their houses. Jerry, he said, a new determination in his voice. I want you to find all of Edward's victims, all of them, from the last 15 years. That's going to take time. Then let's start now, and I want you to rent a house in a neighboring town, far from here. Darlene and Iris are going to stay there until this is all over. And you? I'm going to give an interview, but not the one he wants. What do you mean? Richard smiled for the first time in days, but it wasn't a cheerful smile. It was the smile of a man who had decided to go on the offensive. I'm going to tell everything we know about him, publicly, on television, in the newspapers, wherever it's necessary. I'm going to turn this into an open war. He's going to try to destroy you, warned Jerry. Probably, but at least it won't be a silent war anymore. And when the other victims see that someone had the courage to speak, maybe they'll find courage too. Darlene held his hand. Are you sure about this? Once you start, there's no turning back. I'm sure Edward Hartman has spent years thinking he could hurt innocent people without consequences. It's time to show him that he was wrong. That afternoon, while Darlene and Iris packed their bags for the temporary move, Richard stood on the porch watching the street. He knew he was probably being watched, that his every move was being reported back to Edward. Let them watch. Soon there would be no need to hide anything. The real war was about to begin. The farewell to Darlene and Iris was more difficult than Richard had imagined. They left on a cloudy Tuesday morning, taking only 2 small suitcases and the crafts that Darlene had managed to save from the fire. The rented house was in Oak Creek, 2 hours away, on a quiet street where no one would ask questions about a blind woman and a small child. How long are we going to be separated? Asked Iris, clinging to Richard's leg. Not long, honey. Just until we solve some adult problems. Problems with the bad man? That's right. Iris looked at him with that precocious seriousness that always surprised him. Are you going to be okay? Isn't he going to hurt you? I'm not going to let him hurt me. Do you promise? I promise. But as he watched the car drive away down the dusty road, Richard knew that he was making a promise that he might not be able to keep. Edward had shown that he was capable of anything, and from the moment that Richard made the war public, there would be no more rules of civility. The first interview was scheduled for Thursday on the most watched program on local TV. Richard had strategically chosen the time, 7 in the morning, when workers throughout the region were having breakfast before leaving for work. Many of them had already worked for companies like Edwards and would perfectly understand what he was talking about. Mr. Sterling, are you sure you want to do this? Asked the journalist Ann Patterson, a 40-year-old woman known for her courage in denouncing local irregularities. What you're going to say are very serious accusations. I'm sure, and I have proof of everything. The night before the interview, Jerry brought a report that exceeded even Richard's most pessimistic expectations. In 15 years of operation, Edwards' company had been responsible for at least 8 serious workplace accidents, 3 suspicious disappearances of former employees who threatened to sue the company, and dozens of cases of intimidation and threats. "The pattern is always the same," explained Jerry, spreading photographs and documents on the table. "When an accident happens, first he tries to buy the victim's silence with a small settlement. If the person refuses and threatens to sue, the intimidation begins, and if even then the person doesn't give up, they disappear," completed Richard. "Exactly. 3 cases in the last 10 years. Marcia Davis, a worker who lost 3 fingers in a defective machine, disappeared 2 weeks before the court hearing. Anthony Rivera, a foreman who denounced the use of expired construction materials, vanished in the middle of the night, leaving a wife and 2 children. And Robert Fields. What happened to Robert? He was a company engineer. He discovered that Edward was using substandard cement in public buildings, like schools and health clinics. He threatened to report it. And they found his body in a river 3 months later. Death classified as accidental drowning, but the family always suspected foul play." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. If Edward really was responsible for Robert's death, then they weren't just dealing with a corrupt businessman, but with someone willing to kill to protect his business. "Are the families of the victims willing to speak publicly?" Robert's widow agreed. She never believed the official version of his death. "And I managed to locate a brother of Marcia Davis who is willing to tell what he knows. And the other accident victims, the ones who are still alive? That's more complicated. Most are too scared. But 3 of them agreed to testify, as long as it's anonymously." On the morning of the interview, Richard woke up to a threatening call on his cell phone. "Last chance to change your mind," said the same disguised voice as before. "Cancel this interview, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." "The only person who's going to regret it here is Edward," replied Richard, "for everything he's done for all these years. You have no idea what you're getting into. I have an exact idea, and I'm not scared anymore." The call was terminated, but Richard knew that that would be just the first of many attempts at intimidation. The interview began punctually at 7 in the morning. Ann Patterson introduced Richard as a local businessman who has decided to break the silence about irregular practices in the construction industry. In the first few minutes, he spoke generally about the importance of safety at work and corporate responsibility. But when Ann Patterson asked about specific cases, Richard didn't hesitate. 6 years ago, an employee of Hartman Construction lost her sight in a workplace accident caused by employer negligence, he said, looking directly at the camera. Instead of taking responsibility and taking care of her, the owner of the company fired her while she was still in the hospital and spread lies about her professional competence. Do you have proof of these accusations? I have statements from former employees who were present on the day of the accident. Medical documents that prove that the chemicals used were inadequate for the available safety conditions. And I have the courage of an extraordinary woman who decided to fight for the truth, even knowing the risks. The studio's phone began to ring insistently during the interview. Ann Patterson ignored the first calls, but when the program director made urgent signs from the control booth, she realized that something was happening. "We're going to take a break for commercials," she announced. During the break, the director came running to the studio. "Ann, we're receiving threatening calls. Someone is pressuring us to cancel the interview." "Who?" "I don't know, but they promised legal and financial consequences if we continue." Richard stood up. "If you want to stop here, I understand. But what I've said so far is just the beginning." Ann Patterson looked at him for a moment, then at the director. "We're going to continue. If someone is putting so much pressure to stop this interview, it's because they have something important to hide." When they returned on the air, the journalist went straight to the point. "Mr. Sterling, during the break, we received calls trying to pressure us to cancel this interview. What does that mean?" "It means we're bothering the right people," he replied. And it means that everything I'm saying is true. If it were a lie, why would they bother trying to silence us? It was then that Richard decided to play his strongest card. Anne, in addition to the case that I already reported, we have evidence of at least 7 more serious accidents caused by negligence of the same company, and we have evidence that 3 people who tried to report these irregularities disappeared mysteriously. The studio fell silent. Anne Patterson paled. Are you suggesting that... I'm saying that the time has come for the truth to come out, and I'm inviting all the victims of this company, all the former employees who know about irregularities, all those who have been intimidated or threatened, to break the silence. And if there are reprisals, then we're going to face them together, because silence only protects the guilty. The interview ended, but Richard knew that those 20 minutes of television had changed everything. From that moment on, there would be no going back. As he left the studio, he found Jerry waiting in the parking lot with a worried expression. "So?" asked Richard. "Well, the good news is that the phone hasn't stopped ringing. Dozens of people wanting to testify, former employees of Hartman willing to talk. And the bad news? Edward is already reacting. He hired the best law firm in the region and is spreading that you're a bankrupt businessman trying to destroy a successful competitor. It was expected. And there's more. I heard that he sent men to Oak Creek." Richard's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "They're looking for Darlene and Iris." The war had officially begun, and Edward had made it clear that there would be no limits to his revenge. The news that Edward had sent men after Darlene and Iris made Richard panic. He immediately called the phone at the rented house in Oak Creek, but no one answered. On the second attempt, the line was busy. On the third, it signaled that the phone was out of service. "I need to go there now," he said to Jerry, already running to the car. "Wait, it could be a trap. If Edward found out where they are, he might be waiting for you to show up there. I don't care. If something happens to them, nothing's going to happen if we're smart." Jerry grabbed his arm. "Let me call my contacts in the Oak Creek police. They can take a discreet look at the house." The 15 minutes it took to get information seemed like hours. Finally, an investigator Jerry knew called back. "There's suspicious activity on the street. 2 strange cars circling the area since yesterday, but I managed to talk to the neighbors. The woman and the girl left at dawn with a man around 60 years old." "What man?" Richard asked, his heart racing. "The neighbor described him as bald, skinny, driving a blue van." Jerry smiled for the first time in hours. "That's Sebastian." "Who's Sebastian?" "My cousin. Ex-military, retired. I asked him to keep an eye on the girls without them knowing. If there was any suspicious activity, he must have taken them out of there preventatively." "And where would he take them?" "Sebastian has a small farm in the countryside near Oak Creek. Isolated place, well hidden. Edward would never be able to find it." The relief Richard felt was so intense that his legs almost buckled. "They're safe? With Sebastian? Safer than in a bank vault." But even knowing that Darlene and Isis were protected, Richard realized that the situation had escalated to a dangerous level. Edward wasn't just trying to intimidate them. He was actively hunting 2 innocent women. "Jerry, it's time to go on the offensive." "What do you mean?" "We're going to gather all the evidence we have and hand it over to the district attorney, not just about Darlene's accident, but about all the other crimes we've uncovered. You know that's going to take time. Official investigation, bureaucracy. Then we'll force the time. We'll make it so public that the district attorney won't have a choice but to act quickly." During the next 3 days, Richard transformed himself into a media war machine. He gave interviews to all the local newspapers, appeared on radio shows, created a social media profile where he posted documents and photos of the collected evidence. Each new revelation generated more public interest and more pressure on the authorities. The response came faster than they expected. On Thursday, District Attorney Dr. Ricardo Almeida called a press conference where he announced the opening of a criminal investigation against Edward Hartman for multiple charges: negligence in workplace accidents, intimidation of witnesses, possible manslaughter in the case of Roberto Campos. The evidence presented by Mr. Richard Sterling and his team is robust enough to justify a full investigation, the district attorney declared. If confirmed, we're talking about crimes that could result in decades in prison. Edward's reaction was immediate and furious. That same afternoon, he called his own press conference, surrounded by 3 expensive lawyers and a press secretary. "I am the victim of a smear campaign, orchestrated by a desperate competitor," he declared, his voice trembling with contained rage. "Richard Sterling is bankrupt, losing contracts, and has decided to try to destroy me with lies and slander." "What about the evidence presented?" a journalist asked. "Forged documents, bought testimonies, a complete farce to try to harm me." But even as he publicly denied everything, Edward was taking desperate measures behind the scenes. Jerry discovered that he had withdrawn large sums of money from his bank accounts and was trying to quickly liquidate some of his assets. "He's preparing to flee," the investigator said. "Men like him always have an escape plan when things get tough. We're not going to let him escape. How are we going to stop him?" It was then that Richard had an idea that was both brilliant and dangerous. "We're going to make him turn himself in." "How?" "By offering him exactly what he always wanted, a chance to destroy me personally." On Friday night, Richard posted a video on social media that spread throughout the city in a matter of hours. In it, he appeared alone in his office, speaking directly to the camera. "Edward Hartman, I know you're watching this. You've spent the whole week calling me a liar, a coward, saying that I hide behind other people. So I'm going to give you a chance to prove your accusations." He paused, staring intently at the lens. "Saturday noon at the old textile mill warehouse on the road to Oak Creek. Just you and me. No lawyers, no advisors, no witnesses. We're going to settle this like men." "Have you lost your mind?" Jerry said when he saw the video. "He could try to kill you." "He can try, but he won't succeed." "How are you so sure?" Richard smiled, but there was something cold in that smile. "Because I'm going to be recording everything, hidden cameras all over the warehouse. If he tries anything, it'll be recorded. And if he just comes to talk, well, sometimes people confess things when they think no one is listening. And if he doesn't show up, he'll show up. His ego won't let him refuse a public challenge like this." On Saturday morning, Richard arrived at the abandoned warehouse 2 hours before the agreed-upon time. Jerry and 2 technicians had already installed 6 microscopic cameras in strategic locations, all connected to transmitters that would send the images directly to a secure computer. At 11:40, a black Mercedes parked in front of the warehouse. Edward got out alone, as agreed, but Richard could see other cars parked in the distance. Edward Hartman was a 58-year-old man, with neatly cut grey hair, an expensive suit, and the posture of someone who was used to being obeyed. But when he entered the warehouse and saw Richard waiting in the center of the empty space, there was something different in his eyes, something like poorly disguised despair. "So this is how you want to settle things," Edward said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "This is how men settle their problems," Richard replied. "Face to face, telling the truth." "Truth?" Edward laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You wouldn't recognize the truth if it bit you in the face." "Then tell me your version of the truth, Edward. Tell me about the accident that blinded Darlene Santos, an accident caused by her own negligence." "Lies, and you know it's a lie." "Prove it. John Baker has already proven it." "Recorded deposition, signed, registered with the district attorney." Edward's face twisted into an expression of rage. "John Baker is a jobless drunk who would sell his own mother for a pack of cigarettes." "What about Roberto Campos? Was he also a jobless drunk?" The mention of the name made Edward take a step back. "Roberto Campos suffered an unfortunate accident." Accident? 3 days after threatening to report your fraud in the construction of the elementary school. Coincidence? Like Marcia Santos and Antonio Ribeiro, were they also coincidences? Edward was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the warehouse as if looking for an exit. You have no idea what you're getting into, Richard, he said finally. There are very powerful people involved in these contracts. People who won't like to see their businesses exposed. What people? People who can make you disappear without a trace. And it was at that moment that Edward made the mistake that would seal his fate forever. You really want to know the truth, Richard? Edward said, his posture changing completely. The mask of a respectable businessman had fallen, revealing something much darker underneath. The truth is that useless blind woman got involved where she shouldn't have. Just like you're doing now. Keep talking, Richard encouraged, knowing that the cameras were recording every word. Darlene Santos didn't lose her sight by accident. She lost it because she found out we were using counterfeit material in the school construction. Material that I bought for 1/3 of the price and sold for the normal price to the city. Richard's heart raced. Edward was confessing to fraud, but there was something worse coming. She saw the documents on my desk. Documents that proved the scheme. She threatened to tell the mayor if I didn't stop. Edward laughed bitterly, as if I was going to stop a business that earned me millions because of some worker. So you blinded her on purpose. I taught her not to meddle in matters that weren't her business. I ordered concentrated industrial acid to be used in the sector where she worked, without protective equipment. I said it was a normal cleaning product. The confession was even more horrible than Richard had imagined. It hadn't been negligence. It had been a deliberate attempt at intimidation that resulted in mutilation. And Roberto Campos, did he also see documents he shouldn't have? Roberto was smarter, an engineer. He knew exactly what was happening. He collected evidence for months. Edward walked to a broken window, observing the landscape outside. When he came to me asking for money to stay quiet, I thought I had solved the problem. But you didn't. Roberto got greedy. He wanted more and more money. He threatened to go to the press if I didn't pay him a fortune. Edward turned around, and his eyes had a coldness that made Richard shiver. So I solved the problem definitively. You killed him. I made him understand that there are consequences for those who try to blackmail me. The words hung in the air of the warehouse like a death sentence. Richard knew that he was facing a man who had not only committed fraud and caused accidents, he had actually killed someone to protect his businesses. And Marcia Santos? Antonio Ribeiro? Marcia was gathering former employees to sue the company. Antonio had documents that would prove several irregularities. Edward spoke as if he were discussing the weather. People like that are dangerous for businesses like ours. Ours? You think I do this alone? That I build schools and health posts with counterfeit material without someone from the city knowing? Edward smiled cruelly. Half the politicians in this city receive a percentage of my contracts. The other half pretends not to see anything in exchange for favors. The confession was becoming much bigger than Richard had expected. It wasn't just about a corrupt businessman, but a network of corruption that involved local authorities. Why are you telling me all this? Because you're going to die today, Richard, just like the others who got involved where they shouldn't have. It was at that moment that Richard heard footsteps approaching the warehouse. Several men entered through the side doors. They were the same thugs who had kidnapped Darlene. You said you were coming alone, Richard protested, trying to stay calm. And you believed me? Edward laughed. Men like you, idealists, always make the same mistake. They think everyone plays by the same rules. What if I don't get out of here alive? People will know you killed me. They'll know you suffered an unfortunate accident, like Roberto, like the others. A businessman in financial difficulties who decided to end his own suffering. One of the thugs approached Richard, holding a rope. How do you want it to look, boss? Hanging. Let's hang him from one of the beams. Leave a fake suicide note confessing that he invented everything because he was going bankrupt. Richard felt panic take over his body, but he forced himself to remain calm. Jerry knew where he was. The cameras were recording everything. If something went wrong, at least the truth would be revealed. "Edward, before you do this, answer me one thing," he said. "What?" "Darlene and Isis, why do you care so much about two people who can't hurt you?" "Because they matter to you. And men who care about people are dangerous. They do stupid things, take risks, don't give up." Edward gestured for the thugs to approach. "After you disappear, it'll be their turn. 2 unfortunate accidents in 1 week. What a tragic coincidence." The threat to the people he loved awakened something primal in Richard. He couldn't die there. Darlene and Isis depended on him. It was then that he heard the sound that changed everything. Police sirens approaching rapidly. "What the hell?" Edward muttered, running to the window. 3 police cars were approaching the warehouse at high speed. Behind them came a fire truck. "How did they know we were here?" one of the thugs shouted. "Someone turned us in," another replied. Edward turned to Richard with eyes of total fury. "You bastard! You set up an ambush!" "I didn't set up anything," Richard said, but inside he felt immense relief. Jerry had followed the emergency plan. "Police! Surround the building!" a voice shouted from outside. The thugs began to panic, looking for exits through the back of the warehouse. But Edward remained standing, watching Richard with a hatred that was almost tangible. "Even if they arrest me today," he said, his voice low and venomous, "you won't be able to keep me in jail. I have powerful friends, expensive lawyers. In 6 months I'll be free again." "Maybe. But at least during those 6 months, Darlene and Isis will be safe." "Safe?" Edward laughed bitterly. "You don't understand anything. I have contacts everywhere. In jail, on the street, in other cities. I can reach anyone, anywhere." "Come out with your hands up," ordered the police voice. It was then that something happened that no one expected. Instead of surrendering, Edward pulled a pistol from inside his jacket. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me," he said, pointing the gun at Richard. "Edward, don't be an idiot. It won't solve anything. It'll solve my problem with you." Edward's finger tightened on the trigger at the exact moment the main door of the warehouse was broken down by the police. The shot echoed through the empty space, followed immediately by screams and more shots. When the confusion ended, Edward was on the floor, wounded but alive, surrounded by police officers. Richard had thrown himself on the floor as soon as he saw the gun, and the bullet had only grazed his arm. "Is it all recorded?" he asked Jerry, who arrived running along with the police. "Every word," confirmed the investigator, showing a small receiver. The cameras worked perfectly. As Edward was taken to the hospital under police escort, Richard finally allowed himself to feel total relief. The confession was recorded. The authorities had irrefutable evidence not only of Edward's crimes, but of the network of corruption that involved half the city hall. But even knowing he had won the battle, Richard knew that the war was not over. Edward had made it clear that he had powerful allies. And desperate men always found ways to take revenge. The only thing that mattered now was reuniting with Darlene and Isis and ensuring they were truly safe. The reunion with Darlene and Isis at Sebastian's farm was filled with intense emotions. Isis ran into Richard's arms as soon as she saw him get out of the car, and he hugged her with a force that surprised them both. "Uncle Richard, are you hurt?" she asked, noticing the bandage on his arm. "Just a little scratch, sweetie. Nothing that can't be cured with a hug from you." Darlene approached more slowly, feeling her way to them. When her hands found Richard's face, she touched him delicately, as if she needed to be sure he was really there. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice laden with cautious hope. "It's over," he confirmed. "Edward is in jail. He confessed everything. He'll never be able to hurt anyone again." Tears streamed down Darlene's face, but this time they were tears of relief. For 6 years, she had carried the weight of guilt for her own accident. Now, finally, she knew it hadn't been her fault. "And now? What are we going to do?" she asked. Now you're going back home, to our home." The word "our" did not go unnoticed by Darlene. She raised her head, a look of surprise on her face. "Our? If you want to. I bought a new house, bigger, with a big yard where Isis can play, with a studio where you can work on your crafts." Richard hesitated. "And with space for a family." Isis jumped for joy. "Are we going to be a real family?" Darlene was silent for a long moment, processing what she had heard. "Richard, are you sure about this? After everything you've been through, all the risks?" "I'm absolutely sure. You two have completely changed my life. You've taught me what's really important." "What if I can't be the woman you expect? If my limitations—" "Your limitations don't define who you are, Darlene. Your strength, your courage, your ability to love even after so much suffering, that's who you are. But even with all the joy of the reunion, the first days back in the city brought new challenges. Edward's arrest had triggered a series of investigations that revealed the true extent of corruption in the region. 3 city councilmen were removed from office, the mayor resigned, and dozens of public contracts were cancelled and investigated. The commotion was so great that journalists from all over the state began to cover the case. Richard found himself at the center of a media attention he didn't desire, being called a hero by some and a snitch by others. "I don't like all this exposure," Darlene complained one morning, hearing her name mentioned on the radio for the 10th time that week. "It's temporary," Richard assured her. "Soon the attention will shift to other matters." But 3 weeks later, something happened that proved that not everything was resolved. Richard was in the office when he received a call that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Sterling, this is from Isis's school. There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" "A man tried to take the girl during recess, said he was her uncle. The teacher found it strange because Isis was terrified and started screaming. The man fled when other staff approached. Richard stormed out of the office, calling Jerry on the way. When he arrived at the school, he found Isis trembling in Darlene's arms, who had been called immediately. "What did he look like?" Richard asked the principal. "Tall, grey hair, around 50 years old, wearing a dark suit." The description didn't match any of Edward's known thugs. It was someone new, someone they hadn't identified. "Isis, can you tell me what happened?" Richard asked, kneeling down to the girl's level. "He said he knew the bad man. He said he was going to take me to a place where you would never find me." Isis's voice came out broken by sobs. "But I screamed really loud, just like you taught me." "You did right, sweetie. Very right." That night, Jerry brought disturbing information. Through his contacts in prison, he discovered that Edward had received several visits from a lawyer known for representing powerful figures in state politics. "Looks like he wasn't lying when he said he had influential friends," the investigator said. "And apparently those friends didn't like to see their businesses exposed. So they're going to try to intimidate us. Or worse. The man who tried to grab Isis today wasn't just a simple thug. He was a professional." The realization that they were still in danger hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. He had thought that arresting Edward would solve everything, but in reality, he had only drawn the attention of even more dangerous people. "What do we do?" Darlene asked, who had heard the whole conversation. "We leave town," Richard replied without hesitation. "Today? Where to?" "I have a friend in Pittsburgh, a businessman like me, but honest. He can arrange a safe house there, far from all this mess." "What about our life here? Your work?" "I can manage the company from anywhere. The important thing is to keep you safe." Isis, who was playing on the floor with some drawings, raised her head. "Are we going to live in a big city?" "For a while, yes. And there aren't any bad men there." The innocent question broke Richard's heart. A 4-year-old shouldn't have to worry about bad men. "You'll be safe there," he promised. "We'll all be safe." But even as they organized the emergency move, Richard knew that running wasn't a permanent solution. Sooner or later, they would have to face the consequences of having challenged a corrupt system that went far beyond Edward Hartman. On their last night in town, while they were packing, Darlene asked a question that haunted him too. "Richard, do you regret it? Getting involved with us, facing all this?" He looked at her and at Isis, who was sleeping on the couch, hugging the teddy bear he had bought. He thought about everything they had been through, the fear, the threats, the violence, but he also thought about the joy that these two people had brought into his empty life. "Never," he said with total conviction. "Even knowing all the risks, I would do it all again." "Why?" "Because you've taught me that some things are worth any sacrifice, and that true love means being willing to fight for those we love." The next morning they left the town that had been the scene of so much suffering and also the birth of their unconventional family. But Richard had the feeling that his story with that place was not over, and he was right. The first months in Pittsburgh brought a relative peace that Richard had forgotten existed. The house they found in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood was spacious and safe, with a yard where Isis could play without fear. Darlene set up a small studio in one of the rooms, and gradually her crafts began to gain recognition in the city. Isis adapted to the new school with the natural resilience of children, although she still had occasional nightmares about bad men. Gradually, however, her natural joy returned, and she began to sing her folk songs in the mornings again. "Uncle Richard, when are we going back to our town?" she asked one afternoon, while drawing colorful birds on a large sheet of paper. "Why do you want to go back, sweetie?" "Because there are the Appalachian Mountains that I like to look at, and because that's our real home." The longing in Isis's voice echoed what they all felt, but Richard was still receiving worrying reports from Jerry. Edward remained in jail, but his lawyers had managed several appeals, and there were rumors that influential people were pushing for his release. It was one morning in December that everything changed again. Richard was having coffee when he received a call from Dr. Ricardo Almeida, the district attorney in charge of the case. "Richard, I need you to come here urgently. We have news about Edward Hartman." "What kind of news?" "I prefer to explain in person, but I can tell you that it's good news. Very good." An hour later, Richard was in the district attorney's office in his hometown, accompanied by Jerry. Dr. Almeida greeted them with a smile he couldn't hide. "Edward Hartman is going to spend many years in jail," he announced, "more than any of us imagined." "What happened?" "Two important things. First, the recording of his confession in the warehouse was considered valid by the court. We have him admitting murder, fraud, intimidation of witnesses, a huge list of crimes. And the second?" Dr. Almeida smiled even wider. "The second is that he couldn't keep his mouth shut in jail. He tried to intimidate other inmates, make deals with corrupt guards, and ended up confessing even more crimes to people who were recording everything." "How so?" "The FBI planted an informant in his cell. Over the past 3 months, Edward has detailed the entire corruption scheme in the region. Names, amounts, methods, all recorded and documented." Richard felt a wave of relief wash over his body. That means he's going to stay in jail for the rest of his life, and everyone involved in the scheme too. Yesterday we arrested 8 more people, including 3 politicians and 2 businessmen. And the men who tried to grab Isis, also arrested. They were thugs hired by one of the businessmen involved in the scheme. With the arrest of the mastermind, there is no longer a threat. When Richard returned home with the news, he found Darlene and Isis in the yard. The girl was teaching her sister to see her favorite flowers through touch and smell, in a scene of tenderness that made him smile. "I have news," he announced. "Good or bad?" Darlene asked, always cautious after everything they had been through. "The best possible. Edward and everyone involved will be in jail for a long time. There's no more danger." Isis stopped playing and ran to him. "Does that mean we can go home?" "If you want to, yes." "I want to," the girl exclaimed. "I want to very much." Darlene approached more slowly, as she always did when processing important information. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Absolutely sure." Jerry confirmed that everyone involved is in jail. There's no one left to threaten us, but there was something more that Richard needed to tell them, something he had discovered during his visit to his hometown. Darlene, there's something else. About compensation. What do you mean? The state is going to pay a very high compensation for what Edward did to you, for the years of suffering, for the loss of vision, for everything. Darlene was silent, absorbing the information. How much? Enough so that you never have to worry about money again, so that Isis can study at the best school, go to college, have all the medical care she needs. Tears began to stream down Darlene's face. I'm not crying for the money, she explained. It's because it's finally been recognized that what happened to me was unfair. And there's one more thing, Richard continued. The City Hall wants to pay you a tribute for your courage in reporting the irregularities. A tribute? They're going to name a new park after you, and they want to create a craft center where people with disabilities can learn trades and sell their products. Isis jumped for joy. Is my sister going to have a park named after her? Yes, sweetie. That night, after Isis fell asleep, Richard and Darlene talked at length about the future. The house in Pittsburgh had been good for them, but they all felt they belonged to that small town in the Appalachian where they met. Richard, Darlene said, her voice soft in the darkness of the room, can I ask you something? Of course. During all these months here in Pittsburgh, did you think about giving up on us? On all this complication? The question surprised him. Why would I think that? Because your life was much simpler before you met us. You had peace, security, money, and it was completely empty, he interrupted. Darlene, before you, I just existed. I worked, made money, slept, woke up, and repeated everything again. There was no purpose, no real joy. And now? Now I have a reason to wake up every day. I have two people I love more than my own life. I have a family. A family, she repeated, savoring the words. And if you'll have me, I want to make this official. What do you mean? Richard got up and turned on the soft light on the bedside table. Then, to Darlene's complete surprise, he knelt beside the bed. Darlene Santos, will you marry me? The silence that followed was so long that Richard began to fear she would refuse, but when she finally spoke, her voice was laden with emotion. Are you sure? With a woman who can't see, who comes with a child who isn't even her biological daughter. I'm sure that I want to spend the rest of my life with you both, that I want to officially adopt Isis, that I want to build a real family with the people I love. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to marry you. The next morning, Isis woke up to find the two adults smiling mysteriously. Why do you guys have secret faces? She asked, with the perceptiveness of children. Because we have a surprise for you, Richard said. What surprise? Darlene and I are going to get married, and after the wedding, I'm going to adopt you officially. You're going to be my real daughter. Isis was quiet for a moment, processing the information. Then her face lit up with a smile so radiant that it seemed capable of illuminating the entire house. Does that mean I'm going to have a real dad? If you want to. I want to. I want to very much. And so, on a sunny December morning in Pittsburgh, three people whom fate had brought together unexpectedly decided to formalize what they had known for months. They were a family, formed not by blood, but by love, by choice, and by the determination to stay together against all odds. The return home was decided, but now they would not return as fugitives. They would return as a complete family, ready to rebuild their lives in the place where it all began. A year later, on a golden morning in May, Richard woke up to the sound that had become his favorite melody, Isis humming the folk song about free birds while helping Darlene prepare breakfast. At 5 years old, she had transformed into a confident and cheerful girl who called Richard Dad naturally and drew colorful birds all over the house. Good morning, family, he said, entering the kitchen of the new house they had built on the outskirts of town. "Good morning, Dad," Isis replied, running to hug him. "Look what I did." She showed a drawing where 3 figures holding hands were surrounded by dozens of colorful birds flying freely. In the corner of the sheet, with her handwriting still childish but increasingly firm, was written, "My happy family." "It's beautiful, Princess," Richard said, kissing the top of her head. Darlene approached, her hands automatically finding her husband's face in a gesture that had become routine in the 6 months since the wedding. The simple ring on her finger shone softly in the morning light. "Nervous for today?" she asked. "A little," he admitted. That day would be the inauguration of the Darlene Santos Craft Center, a project that had been born from the union between the compensation she had received from the state and the investment that Richard had made with his own resources. The center would offer free craft courses for people with disabilities, as well as a space where they could sell their products. "It's strange to think that it all started with a 4-year-old girl asking for help," Darlene commented, stroking Isis's hair. "Everything good that happened in our life started that day," Richard corrected. "When a brave girl decided that she wasn't going to accept that the people she loved would continue to suffer." During the months since their return, many things had changed in town. With the fall of the corruption network led by Edward, new and honest politicians had taken power. Works that had been stopped for years were resumed with quality materials, contracts were revised, and slowly the city began to rebuild on more solid foundations. Richard's company had grown, but now he made a point of maintaining the highest ethical standards. Each employee had adequate safety equipment, each work strictly followed the technical standards, and there was an open channel for anonymous reports of any irregularities. "You know what makes me the happiest?" Darlene said, while finishing Isis's hair for the inauguration ceremony. "What?" asked father and daughter together. "It's that other people won't go through what I went through. Children like Isis won't grow up seeing their mothers suffer without being able to do anything. And children like me will have daddies and mommies who protect them," added Isis wisely. The inauguration of the center was emotional. Dozens of people were present, former employees of Edward who could now speak freely, family members of the victims of the accidents, local authorities, and especially people with disabilities interested in the courses offered. When Darlene gave her thank you speech, her firm voice echoed through the main hall of the center. "For 6 years, I carried the blame for an accident that wasn't my fault," she said. "For 6 years, I believed that my disability made me less capable, less valuable. Today, I know I was wrong." She paused, her hands finding those of Richard and Isis, who were by her side. "I learned that our strength doesn't come from what we can see with our eyes, but from what we can see with our hearts. I learned that family isn't about blood, but about choice. And I learned that when brave people come together, they can change the world." The applause was warm and prolonged, but for Richard, the most emotional moment came later, when a grey-haired lady approached Darlene. "My name is Maria Santos," she said. "I am the mother of Marcia, who disappeared 5 years ago." Darlene held her hands delicately. "I am very sorry for your loss." "I don't come here to be sad," the lady continued. "I come to thank you. Because of your courage, I discovered what really happened to my daughter. I can't bring her back, but at least I can have peace knowing the truth." She turned to Isis, who was watching the conversation attentively. "And you, brave girl, saved many people when you asked for help for your father." "He wasn't my dad yet," Isis corrected, "but I knew he had a good heart." "How did you know?" "Because he got sad when he heard someone crying. And people who get sad when others suffer are always good people." In the afternoon, when they returned home, the 3 sat in the yard under the shade of the maple tree that Richard had planted as soon as they moved in. It was a reference to the tree that Isis loved in the first house where they lived together. "Dad," Isis said, drawing in her new notebook, "can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Princess." "That first time when I went to look for you in your office, I was very scared." Scared of what? Scared that you wouldn't like me. Scared that you'd tell me to go away. She raised her eyes from the drawing. But then you held my hand, and I knew everything was going to be okay. How did you know? Because your hands were warm. And people with warm hands always take good care of children. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. In less than 2 years, that extraordinary girl had taught him more about courage, love, and hope than he had learned in 50 years of life. Isis, he said, can I tell you a secret too? You can. That first time when you appeared in my office, I was also scared. Of what? Scared of not knowing how to take care of you. Scared of not being good enough to be a dad to such a special girl. And now? Are you still scared? Richard looked at his daughter, then at his wife, who was smiling as she listened to the conversation. He looked at the house they had built together, at the yard where Isis played safely, at the future full of possibilities that stretched ahead. Now I'm not afraid of anything anymore, he said, because I've learned that when you have a real family, you can face anything. Like the little birds in my drawings? Isis asked. What do you mean? The little birds fly high because they know they have a safe nest to come back to. Isis's simple wisdom perfectly summarized everything they had built together. They had learned to fly, to be courageous, to face adversity, to fight for what was right. But most importantly, they had built a safe nest where love was unconditional and family was sacred. As the sun set over the Appalachian Mountains that night, painting the sky gold and pink, 3 people whom fate had united in an improbable way were gathered in the yard of their home, planning the future and celebrating the present. Darlene was working on a new piece of art, her skillful hands transforming simple straw into art. Isis was drawing colorful birds flying freely over green mountains, and Richard watched the 2 most important women in his life, marveling at the miracle that was that family. It had started with a desperate child asking for help from a wealthy and lonely man. It had turned into an epic battle against corruption and injustice. But it ended in the simplest and most beautiful way possible, with a family united by love, building a future where goodness prevailed over evil, where justice triumphed over oppression, and where 3 hearts that had found each other promised never to separate again. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Isis fell asleep without drawing birds trying to escape from cages. Her birds now flew freely through the infinite skies of her dreams, exactly as her family had learned to do in real life. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.